All right, I said we were going to talk about the Middle East. Here we are talking about the Middle East. And we are going to deviate just a little bit now because even though this is a U.S. course, the history of the Middle East cannot be understood if we don't go back and talk about what is the Middle East, where it came from, and all that stuff. So we're just going to do a brief overview here. What is the Middle East? It is important to know that the term was created by the British to describe their land holdings between Britain and Asia. And because Britain considered themselves to be the center of the world, the Middle East is the middle land between Great Britain and Far East, which is Asia. But that's obviously relative to where you are on the continent or in the world, right? So just because it's east of Britain doesn't mean it's actually east of everybody. So realistically, the more regionally appropriate term for that area would probably be Southwest Asia and North Africa. So realistically, if you wanted to be more inclusive and less Eurocentric, I think the better term would be SWANA, Southwest Asia, North Africa. But collectively, the land holdings in the Middle East by the British are considered to be anywhere from Morocco all the way to Pakistan. And so when people talk about the Middle East in the news and even today, what the countries they're typically talking about and ones we're going to talk about are Egypt, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Syria, Kuwait, Lebanon, Yemen, Oman, Jordan, Israel, Palestine, and Iraq. That is our Middle East or SWANA. Now, pre-World War I, almost all of these regions are under Ottoman and Turkish control. And once World War I is in effect and the Ottoman Empire is dissolving, that's when the British really start to get more involved. Not that they weren't already involved. The European powers had been colonizing Asian and African nations, but World War I kind of messes around with that and then adds to the issues that we face today. So, one of the places that Britain and France are definitely interested in is the Suez Canal, which is on the edge of Egypt, and it connects the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea. And Britain has a landholding in Egypt because of the Industrial Revolution. And Egypt had used a lot of British financing and banking to industrialize. And so Britain kind of has control over Egypt in an economic way. And so Britain wants to control the Suez Canal, because if you control the shipping between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, you get a lot of shipping rights. The same reason the U.S. wants the Panama Canal. So because of the nationalizing of Egyptian funds to Britain, Britain basically ends up controlling the Suez Canal for a very long time, which again will lead to issues later on. Then we have World War I. So during World War I, we have Iran, which is occupied by British and British and Russian forces. And they make a deal with Iran. If Iranian soldiers will fight with the British to drive the Ottomans out of the Middle East, then they'll help Iran become Iranian, basically. So, after World War I, the Ottoman Empire falls apart and Russia withdraws its troops from Iran. And Britain now controls Iran independently. There's no alliances there. And within Iran, Britain controls Iranian oil. So, Britain and France have also secretly signed an agreement during World War I called the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which said that if the Ottoman Empire did dissolve, that Britain and France could divide those Ottoman lands between themselves. Now, again, they're telling these people in these colonies and in these countries to support the British, the British cause during World War I to help get them to freedom. But Britain has no interest in actually freeing anybody. They're just going to colonize them. So, Britain and France signed the Sykes-Picot Treaty in secret, and they divide the Ottoman lands up between themselves. Now, we know at the end of World War I, one of President Wilson's 14 points was self-determination of nations. And essentially what that means is that any independent nation gets to decide for themselves how to govern what they want to do, become a sovereign nation. It's not up to colonizers to decide what that nation is going to do. But because the Paris Peace Treaty, the Treaty of Versailles, the 14 points, all that stuff doesn't really take off the way Wilson had hoped, that self-determinations doesn't really stick. And so Britain and France end up keeping all the lands that they agreed to. There is no self-determination of lands within that Middle East landholding company. And then the U.S. gets itself involved in that region when oil is struck in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia signs a 6-year deal with the Standard Oil Company of the United States, the same Standard Oil Company that's run by Rockefeller back in the Gilded Age. Saudi Arabia is going to be the sole supplier of oil to the Standard Oil Company. And they signed this deal with the U.S. in 1933. And when it comes time to re-up the deal, things have already kind of taken a turn in Europe, and World War II is starting. So that deal stays in place because other things happen. And so the deal is never dissolved. It's just there. So after World War II, now the U.S. is just the only country who doesn't need to rebuild in that area because obviously we are over in the United States. And so the U.S. ends up controlling a lot of the Middle Eastern oil reserves because the European countries are all rebuilding. And so a lot of those nations have turned to decolonization efforts. And those decolonization efforts and everything that happens from 1948 forward, even until today, is a direct result of this massive confusion of what the British think they belongs to them and who controls what and who gets the right to decide what their land is and who owes somebody else something. So we're going to start with the founding of Israel and the Israel-Arab War of 1948, and we will continue this very complicated story from there.